Now, Kenya, just like her neighbours Uganda and Tanzania, released her national budget last week, but is the new budget some form of government bubble? Director of Callstreet Research, George Bodo, joined us earlier for more.
It is a very delicate balancing act, by the way, given the fact that Kenya, just like many other countries, is facing a lot of uncertainties around the COVID-19 pandemic. But the most interesting thing is that, which I found to be puzzling actually, was that the National Treasury and the government in general, they're not seeing any negative impacts on government revenues as a result of the pandemic, which I think is like living in a bubble in my assessment. I think the reality is that the COVID pandemic will have a significant impact on government revenues in the next fiscal year, which begins in July 1st and runs until June 30th. And I think that for that reason, I think I still see another supplementary budget in the next 12 months just to align expenditures with the revenue realities.
Judge, don't you think, before we get to the supplementary budget, the government is very confident there? Maybe the introduction of new taxes. We've seen the incoming of something like a digital tax, similar to what Kenya's neighbours Uganda already had. Could this be where the government is looking at, you know what, we'll be making money and we'll be getting revenue from these new forms of taxes?
Yeah, but that's what you call a fiscal confusion. On the one hand, right, the government wants to unlock the economy and unfreeze commerce, because essentially commerce has been frozen and commerce is the bedrock of the economy. You want to unfreeze commerce, you want transactions to come back, you want basically the economy to come back out of its feet, but you're still imposing tax on some of the core elements that you expect. For instance, online transactions. This is where the government is actually is trying to encourage, for instance, cashless transactions, but you go ahead and tax online transactions. It's a massive confusion, by the way. Not even that. The government has outlined some outrageous taxation measures, in my view. For instance, the government wants to tax pensioners. Who does that? It just shows you how desperate the government is to raise revenues. They're actually in a tight corner, and that's for me, that's a sign of desperation. You don't tax pensioners. Some of those just, and one of the other tax measures will outline is taxing online transaction. That's very desperate, and that's counterproductive in my view.
Look, George, President Uhuru Kenyatta has been what many experts call stubborn in regards to some of his projects. One of those being the SGR project that still is taking a very big chunk out of that Ministry of Transport budget there. Could we see actually realignment dealing with the reality of how much is going to be collected? Or is Kenya going to go back out there to the market to borrow?
I think Kenya will borrow significant, because tell you what, debt service bill for this the coming fiscal year is just about 56% of tax revenue. The government wants to achieve, it's about 900 billion, which is just about $9 billion. So I think out of that, it's about 500 billion is interest, and the balance is redemptions. You're spending about 56% of your ordinary revenues, tax revenues, to service debt. What do you have? That takes out a significant. What do you have to stimulate the economy? The economy right now requires significant development spending, and if you look at development spending, it's just about 600 something, just slightly over 600 billion Kenyan shillings, which is just about $6 billion. For you to stimulate an economy that has been battered by COVID pandemic, you need to stimulate development spending. Look at the economic stimulus package that the government unveiled a couple of weeks ago. The government unveiled about $500 million in economic stimulus package. How do you stimulate? How can $500 million stimulate a 9 trillion Kenyan shilling economy, which is just about $90 billion economy? You're using half a billion dollars you want to stimulate a $19 billion economy. The government is living, I don't know, the government is actually out of touch with reality. The reality is that the government needs to scale development spending. The government needs to scale back on recurrent spending. But if you look at the recurrent spending, as I said, 56% is going to go to debt service. Where are they going to get the liquidity to stimulate the economy? The budget that was read this year, by the way, is I would call it a charade, in my view.
George, when you look at that stimulus budget vis-a-vis in relation to the national expenditures expected in the new budget, who is actually going to benefit from it?
I think the politicians will benefit a lot from it because there is about 10 billion shillings, which is about $100 million. There is actually, if you look at total, about 20 billion Kenyan shillings is going to go towards what we call kazi kwa vijana, right? Which is essentially jobs to the youth, which is it's like employing youths to dig up stuff on the streets and spend about $100 million to that. Who's going to run those contracts? Who's going to be given those contracts to do them? There's another similar amount, close to $100 million, is going to go towards VAT refunds, and another one is going to go towards clearing outstanding pending bills, which is a big issue, by the way. And I'm seeing another supplementary budget that is going to be released to order ministries to clear the pending bills. So who's going to budget from this? I don't see who's going to budget from this, benefit from this, by the way, except the politicians who are going to run these programs. By the way, there's a big problem because even the COVID fund spending, there's no accountability to it. Nobody knows where the funds are going to. And that's why Parliament the other day was asking that they want to have control of these funds.
That's quite unfortunate for East Africa's biggest economy. Now, when it comes to expected allocations in the budget, some of the ministries weren't expected to receive bigger chunks this year, things like health. But as always, a big chunk of it is going to the likes of defense. Now, what's your view there?
Well, my biggest problem with spending allocation is that there's no empirics. There's nobody who doesn't study and say, okay, fine, this is the basis why we are increasing our allocation to these ministries. Like, for instance, defense should not have a higher allocation than education. Or the government, for instance, has rolled out a new curriculum, which are calling it a competency-based curriculum, CBC, which requires huge spending, by the way, to roll it out effectively to all the schools in the country. I would expect it that the Ministry of Education, for instance, would have a higher allocation. Ministry of Housing, for instance, the government is having this ambitious affordable housing program. The government, well, about 3 years ago, the president unveiled during his swearing in by the
Director of Callstreet Research, Bodo.